Hey guys, my name is Trevor Sullivan. I'm a solutions architect with StratusGrid, and welcome back to our video channel. Really quickly, StratusGrid is an AWS Premier Consulting partner, and we're also an independent software vendor. We have a SaaS tool called Stratosphere, and you can learn more about Stratosphere at stratusgrid.com. And if you check out our product section here, essentially what Stratosphere is a SaaS tool that helps you to identify cost and security optimizations across your entire AWS environment and get those implemented so that you can improve your financial efficiency in the cloud as well as your overall cloud security posture. Now, the topic for our video today is going to be around the Amazon AppStream service. So AppStream is a managed service that allows you to stream desktop or graphical applications using a web browser, or you can actually use one of the client applications that's provided by the AppStream service. You can install that on like Mac OS or Windows, for example, and then you can stream those applications from a instance that's running in the AppStream managed service over to the client system. So what this allows you to do essentially is to determine a preset list of business applications that you want to publish out to certain end users. And then you can make those applications available through a standard Linux or Windows-based image on a cloud-based instance in the AppStream service. And then you can publish those applications out to your end users so that they can access them. This is really helpful if you need to, for example, onboard contractors and provide a limited set of applications to them for very specific purposes, or if you have maybe a very standardized type of role at your organization, like perhaps a call center employee that's maybe taking notes and interacting with a call center application that allows them to take calls and communicate with your customers. You can publish out those types of applications using the AppStream service. So what we're going to do is take a look at how to basically set up a custom Linux-based image. You can also set up Windows-based images in AppStream as well, but we're just going to focus on Linux for now because it's a kind of a broad service and some of the moving parts are a little bit on the slow side. So we're just going to focus on Linux for the time being. And then we're going to take a look at how to actually access that application as an end user after performing the administrative setup tasks. Now, one of the prerequisites that you'll need to set up in the AppStream service, which is covered pretty well in the AppStream documentation here, is a VPC environment. In AWS, if you're new to AWS, then VPC is essentially just the virtual private cloud service and allows you to set up a virtual network in the cloud that hosts different types of network services. So one of the most common things that you'll connect to a VPC is just what's called an EC2 instance or a virtual machine to your virtualized network, and that allows it to communicate with other services that are running on that same virtualized network environment. And then you can use things like a client VPN, a site-to-site VPN, or Direct Connect if you want to set up kind of permanent connections into that VPC from the outside, or you can just host those applications inside of that VPC and expose them publicly on the internet if they're, server-based applications. So anyways, you're going to need a basic VPC environment, and typically what a VPC consists of is the VPC itself, a few subnets across different availability zones. You'll typically have an internet gateway that allows inbound and outbound or ingress and egress network traffic to the internet. And then also you'll oftentimes have private subnets that need outbound internet connectivity. So you'll also typically have a NAT gateway that allows private instances to communicate with the internet outbound, but it doesn't allow inbound or ingress access to those instances. So you will need a basic VPC environment set up. If you are new to VPC and don't really want to deal with a lot of that complexity, you can just head over to the VPC service in the AWS Management Console here. And there's actually a little wizard here that allows you to set up a really simple VPC. So if you say create VPC, it just kind of guides you through the the process of creating a really simple VPC, how many public subnets you want, how many private subnets you want. And this is just a really easy way to get a VPC set up and running without having to manually set up route tables, manually set up subnets, set up all that kind of IPv6 and IPv4 subnet CIDR blocks and things like that. So feel free to use the VPC wizard here to kind of guide you through that process to create a new VPC. So I'm going to assume that you've already got that VPC in place, and we're just going to focus on the AppStream components here. Now, when we talk about setting up AppStream and installing different applications and then making those applications available, we are going to go through a pretty simple process here. So what we want to do is set up what's called an image builder. And so the image builder is basically this temporary instance that we spin up, and then we install any applications that we want to on that builder instance. And then we run a couple of CLI commands to expose those applications so that when we spin up this image that we create into a production fleet, those applications become available to any users that have access to that fleet of instances. So the image builder is an important concept because that's how we customize our image and actually specify which applications are installed and how they're exposed to our end users. So once we launch the image builder, we do the installation process, we run the CLI commands to expose very specific binaries on that system, and then we create an image or a snapshot of the image builder instance, and that becomes an image that's persisted inside of the AppStream image registry, which you can see right over here. So in the image registry, there's actually a bunch of built-in images that are just available from AWS natively. So there are things like Rocky Linux. So if we just kind of look through the different pages here, there are images for Rocky Linux. There's Windows Server 2016. There's Windows Server 2019. There's Amazon Linux 2. There's Windows Server 2022, which I think is the latest Windows Server edition that's available through this service. And there's also a Red Hat Enterprise or a RHEL 8 version there as well. So it's kind of up to you which of those you want to use. I'm going to be using the Rocky Linux image just for simplicity here and kind of show you how to install different applications there. But feel free to look through the different images that are available here, and you can decide which of those you want to build on top of. Now, if you want to, you can also filter images here. So if I change the visibility equals public here, that's only going to show me the publicly accessible images on AWS. But I can also do a filter for visibility equals private, and that is going to show me the images that I have already created. So I have several images here that I've already created in preparation for recording this video. And so you can see these images right here. I've got a Windows image right here. I've also got several Rocky-based images here as well with different dates in the name, just so I can kind of remember exactly when I created those. There is also a time created field here, so if you forget to put that in the image name here, then that's always available there. Also, if you click into the image details, you do have the ability to see which applications were exposed from that particular image, and you can also associate resource tags. So if you want to associate some metadata, like a specific department or business unit that that particular image was created for, then you can specify those in the tags here. I typically like to add an owner tag here just so that other teammates know that this is a resource that was created by myself inside of our development environment. And so as you can see, I was just very easily able to add that image metadata right here under the resource tags. Now, one of the other things that you can do once you have an image is that you can actually copy it. So you could create it in one region. As you may know, if you're new to AWS, a lot of different services are very regional in nature. And so this allows you to kind of work in different locations globally. And so right now I'm working in the US West 2 Oregon region, but if I wanted to create an image in the Oregon region, but then use that image in a different region like the Ohio region here, then I can simply say copy this image and specify the Ohio US East region here. And then I could specify a name for that image, and it'll copy it over to that target region. So that gives you some flexibility there to specify where that image is going to be used. Also, if you want to apply updates to images, there's a built-in update image mechanism right here inside of the console. You can also share the image with other AWS accounts. So in enterprise environments, you might have maybe 20 or 30 or even a couple hundred different AWS accounts that are divvied up by development and QA and production, and different development teams within your organization might have their own set of AWS accounts. So it's very quickly, you're very oftentimes going to have a lot of different AWS accounts. And so having the ability to build these images in a central shared account and then to share those images across multiple different AWS accounts is really handy as well. So let's go ahead and actually talk about how to get this system set up. So what we're going to do for starters is to actually create what's called an image builder here. So this is the first thing that you're going to do in order to customize the AppStream service for your specific needs. We're going to use the public images in the image registry here in order to instantiate an image builder. And then we're going to install some applications. We're going to run some CLI commands to expose those. And then we're going to snapshot or capture an image from that customized environment. And then we're going to build a production fleet so that we can actually publish that out to end users. Now, if you're looking for the documentation on this, there is a document down here that talks about how to launch an image builder in the AppStream administration guide here. And then there is a document down here that talks about how to actually create the Linux-based image. You don't necessarily have to go through all of these steps, but the main thing that you're going to be doing is using this thing called the Image Assistant CLI tool. It's basically just called AppStream with a capital A, AppStream Image Assistant. And that is how you specify applications that you want to expose from the image once they're installed. And then it also allows you to invoke the create image operation, which will actually take a snapshot of that image builder. So that's the commands that we're going to be using. And there's further documentation here as well. And if you're using a Windows system, it's called imageassistant.exe. And if you're on Linux, it's going to be called the AppStream Image Assistant binary. So just keep in mind that there's two different names depending on which operating system you are using. All right, so let's go back over to the image builder here. And we're going to just say launch an image builder. So this is kind of our starting point. And then I'm going to say, show me publicly available images here. And I specifically want to look for Rocky Linux 8. And the instance family, I'm going to set to general purpose because there are graphics instance families available, but I'm just going to choose general purpose for the time being. And so then I can choose this image right here. And we'll hit next. And then we'll give it some information. So I'll call this Trevor Rocky YouTube, and then today's date, which is the 30th of December on 2024. We can also specify resource tags for this image builder instance, and then we can choose the instance type. So much like other services like EC2, for example, you can specify how many virtual CPUs and how much RAM or memory you want to associate. You can also associate an IAM role if you need specific permissions to certain AWS services. We're not going to do that because we don't need any access to AWS services for now. And then under the network access, this is where we're going to choose our VPC. So I'm going to choose enable default internet access, and then I'm going to choose my VPC, and we're going to choose one of my public subnets here. So make sure you choose a public subnet if you want default internet access there. And then we're just going to hit next. And it'll show me all the settings that I selected, and then we'll say launch image builder. Now, launching the image builder can take a little bit of time, so I might just pause this video so that we don't have to waste a lot of time here waiting for this instance to come up. But what I will show you is that if we come back to images, go back to the image builder tab here, you can see that I've got this new image builder that is currently in the pending status. And so what we'll do is actually drill into that. And then this connect button that's currently grayed out right here will become blue, which indicates that that instance is ready. So that status will change into the ready or available state so that we can actually connect to that instance. And then I can connect to it either in the browser, or I could use the native application for Windows 11, which I'm currently running here. And I could connect to that builder instance and basically manage it like any other virtual machine using a graphical Linux environment, and then we can install an application and publish it out. Now, what application are we going to install and publish out? Well, there's a lot of different applications out there that you could use, but there is actually one called Joplin. And so this is basically an open source note-taking application. It's a graphical tool. There's a lot of other applications you could install, like maybe GitHub Desktop. I think they have a Linux application that you could use if you're using GitHub. So there's, of course, a Windows version here. Let's see if there's a Linux version available. It doesn't look like there is. It looks like it's just Windows or Mac OS, but there's a lot of different Linux desktop applications that you could use. Firefox is, of course, another one that you could use. I'm sure there's a lot of different Electron-based applications that you could use out there as well. But I'm going to be using Joplin. Joplin is a really nice note-taking application that I actually use personally. And it does have an app image available. And so with app image, it's basically just a standalone binary that has all of its dependencies packaged up inside of it. So that makes it really easy to install. So if you just click on the link here for full installation details, I'm not going to download the Windows version locally, but if you go to the documentation here, there is this link here that allows you to download the Linux app image file. And then once you download that app image file, all you have to do is just do a chmod command in the terminal to make that app image file executable, and then move it to some shared file system location like user local bin, for example, and then any user should theoretically be able to launch that application. And so that's just a really nice application to kind of test out as you are dealing with AppStream. And then, of course, from there, once you get Joplin installed and published out, you could look at other graphical applications out there that you could publish out as well. But this is the application that I'm going to be using in this video for demonstration purposes. All right, so now if I just click on the refresh button here, you can see that the image builder is in the running status. So if I click on connect right here, that'll just take me over to the web-based AppStream client. And then it's going to prompt you which user you want to log in as. So I'm going to choose, I want to log in as the administrative user so that I have permission to install applications and move them around on the file system and all that kind of stuff. And then what we're going to do is just launch a browser in this environment here. So you can see we have a standard Linux desktop environment here. And then if I click on applications, you can see I don't really have a whole lot installed right now. If I do show all applications, there's not really much installed right here at the moment. So what I'm going to do is to actually install Firefox. So let's launch a terminal here. And let me just bump up the font size here really quick. Let's do view, zoom in. Sometimes the keyboard shortcuts don't work exactly the same if you are inside of a browser, inside of a terminal. So what we're going to do is just say sudo dnf install Firefox. So DNF is the package manager that you use on Rocky Linux here in order to install applications. So we're just going to get the base Firefox browser installed, and then that'll allow us to go out and download the app image file for Joplin and get that onto the system. And so we could publish out Firefox as well, since we're going to have that installed on this system. So let's say, yes, go ahead and install Firefox there. And you can also enable things like the clipboard. So this is an optional permission that you can enable. You can also disable clipboard access in AppStream for security reasons if you don't want to allow users to be able to copy information from an AppStream instance out to their native desktop system. That's a security feature that's available, but it does also have access to things like your microphone and webcam, and you can set up dual monitors if you want to. So it's a fairly featureful service here. All right, so now we've got Firefox installed. Let's go ahead and launch Firefox, and we're going to go out and download Joplin on the image builder instance. So let's open up a new tab and just do a search for Joplin download. And we'll click on the download link here. And that looks like it's going to take us straight to the Joplin download. And if it's Linux, it's going to take us over to the documentation page. And then we can just click on the Get It on Linux link here. And that should download this app image file. Looks like it's about 230 megabytes right now. for the current version. So because this is running on a remote instance in the AWS data centers, it downloads pretty quickly there. So now we can just close Firefox. And if we look at the downloads directory here, you can see that we have this app image file. Now we need to move this app image file to a location on the file system where all users have access to it. So what I'm going to do is actually do a sudo move the Joplin app image file. Let me go into downloads and then Joplin app image. And I'm going to move that to user local bin. And I'm going to rename the file to just Joplin by itself. And then I also need to make this file executable. So I'm going to say sudo chmod +x user local bin Joplin, and that'll make the application executable now. So now that app image file, I should just be able to run Joplin because user local bin is part of my path environment variable by default. And so I should just be able to run Joplin here as the administrative user. And we should see the Joplin window pop open here and just some default set of notes kind of pop up. All right, I don't need a key ring there, so I'm just going to hit escape a couple of times, and you'll just see the application kind of initializes to its default state. The default notebook that becomes available here just has some help about the application itself, but as you can see, the application works perfectly fine. Now, we also want to test this application to make sure it works as a standard non-administrative user. So we can click on admin commands up here and then say switch user. And I want to log in as a test user instead of the administrator, because that will allow me to validate that the application that I'm trying to share out actually works correctly before we take a snapshot of this image and then build a fleet from it, which takes extra time. So the more testing that you do locally here on this image builder instance, the better result that you should have by the time that you actually launch a fleet from it. So if we come over to applications here, open up a terminal, let's just see if we can launch Joplin as this standard user here. And it looks like it's going to load here because we haven't gotten an error yet. And so sure enough, Joplin launches just fine because we put it into a shared file system location where users typically have access to. So let's go ahead and just let it launch here. And then we'll close it and then switch back to the administrative user. And we'll use that CLI tool that we talked about earlier in order to publish this application from this custom image and then actually take a snapshot of the image itself. All right, so Joplin launches. Let's also just make sure that Firefox can run here as well as the standard user. I don't really foresee any issues, but let's just validate that for the sake of sanity checking. And so sure enough, here is Firefox up and running. And then if you need the path to Firefox, since we know where Joplin is because we specifically moved it to the file system location, but we don't necessarily know where Firefox got installed to because we installed it with the DNF package manager. So if I run which Firefox, this command will just tell me which file system location has the Firefox binary. And so this is the path that we're going to publish out using the App Image Assistant CLI tool. All right, so now that we've tested both applications as the end user, we're going to switch back to the administrator user here, and we're going to run the necessary commands as the administrative user to add these applications and publish them out. All right, so let's run app, and then I'm just going to hit tab to auto-complete that. So just do capital A, PP, and then tab, and it should auto-complete AppStream Image Assistant. And if you just run this command with no parameters, it'll show you the different subcommands that are available here. The only ones you really need to worry about are add application and then create image. So we're going to call the add application subcommand, and we're going to specify the name of the application, which is just kind of a friendly name that you can specify. So you can call it whatever you want to. I mean, if you want to call it Firefox Production, you can call it that if you want to. I'm just going to use really simple names. But then the other parameter that we have to specify, let's actually just do AppStream Image Assistant -add application with no parameters. And you'll see it says required option name is missing, and then required option absolute app path is missing. And so absolute app path is the file system location of the binary that we want to publish out. There are some other optional parameters down here as well, so feel free to check those out. If you want to set the working directory of the application, you can do that. If you want to specify some additional launch parameters, you can specify that as well. There's a lot of customization that you can do in here, and there's actually a lot of documentation in the AppStream documentation that talks about setting default application settings and setting default environment variables for users and things of that nature, but I'm just going to keep things really simple for the time being. All right, so what I'm going to do is run the AppStream image assistant here, add application, and then we're going to say -- name Firefox, and then absolute app path is going to be user, I think it's local Firefox, if I recall correctly, or user bin Firefox. Let's try that. Yep, there it is. Okay, so that'll specify the path to that application. If you want to specify a custom icon, you can use that parameter as well, but I'm just going to use the defaults for now and keep it as minimal as possible. And then I'm going to run this command again, but I'm going to publish out Joplin this time. So we're going to say -- name is Joplin, and then absolute app path is going to be user local bin Joplin, and we'll go ahead and let that run as well. And as you can see, we get status 0, which is good, and then message says success. So now if we want to validate that, one command that we have to do that is just list applications right here. So we'll just say AppStream image assistant list applications. And as you can see, this JSON output here, we have two different applications. There's Firefox, and then we also have Joplin right here as well. So now we've added both of these applications to this kind of manifest configuration file for the AppStream service. And now all we need to do is to actually capture an image of this image builder so that we can capture an image and then use that when we create a production fleet. So of course, if we take a look at the subcommands here, let me scroll up just a little bit here. We have this create image command right here, just like we had the add application command. So I'm going to say AppStream image assistant, and then we'll do the create - image command. And if you run that without any parameters, it'll say, hey, the required option name is missing. And so we need to specify a name for the image. We can also specify a detailed description. There's also a display name that you can set if you'd like to. You can also customize which version of the AppStream agent software that you want to use. I'm not going to bother customizing that, but in certain production use cases, you might want to, pin a specific version or just tell it to use the latest version. It's kind of up to you how you want to manage that. And so for now, I'm just going to say AppStream image assistant, create image -- name, and then I'll call this Trevor Rocky YouTube - 2024 12:30. And I think that's it. So when we run that command, we're going to get disconnected from the image builder. So essentially, it's going to shut down the virtual machine, and it's going to take a snapshot of it, and it's going to capture it as an image inside of our image registry. So as you can see over here under images, if we go to the image registry, we have this new image right here called Trevor Rocky YouTube and the date, and the status is currently pending. And if you go to image builder, you can see that the image builder itself, that builder instance that we spun up, that we were just interacting with graphically, went from the available state to the snapshotting state. And so this is going to take several minutes to capture an image of that instance into the AppStream image registry. And then once we have this image available inside of our registry here, you can see the applications, by the way, that we have shared out of that image right here. So those are the applications that'll be available when we actually build a production fleet from it. So once we have that image, we can then go over to the fleet section here. We can create what's called a fleet of AppStream instances using that base image that we've customized. And then we can create what's called a stack. And a stack basically just has some user settings associated with it that links users in the user pool here to a specific fleet. So you have to create the fleet, and then you create a stack that points to the fleet. And at that point, you can then have users log in to that instance. So if we go to fleets right here, you can see I have an existing fleet. It's currently in the stopped state, but this fleet right here specifies the instance type that we want to use. We also have a fleet type here that specifies if it's always on or if it's on demand. There's also something called elastic capacity as well. And then you can specify which image you want to use in the fleet. And one of the nice things is that once you create a fleet, you don't have to create a new fleet every time that you create a new image. Once you create a new image that has updated software inside of it, you can just go into your existing fleet and then go to the image details, and then you can edit the image details and just choose a new image that you want to make available through that fleet. So as you version control your images, you can just go into your existing fleets, you can switch it to a new image, and then your users, when they connect back to that fleet in the future, will start to get new versions of your applications that you've published into those images. All right, so what we're going to do for now is just wait for this image to become available here. That does take a few minutes. One of the other things that you could do while that is creating is go over to your user pool here. You can ignore directory configs, you can ignore usage reports, you can ignore the application manager here as well. That's for something else called Elastic Fleets, where you create these things called app blocks. You can ignore quick links. The only thing we care about here are these top 4 items: stacks, fleets, images, and user pool. And so what we can do is invite a user. So I have a user here called StratusGrid at proton.me, and then I'll call that Trevor Sullivan and say create user. And then if we go to that user's email, we should see an invitation to basically set a password for the AppStream service so that this user can then access applications from the AppStream service here. Now, the part of the stack is assigning the user to a stack. So for example, for this existing stack that I have right over here, if I take a look at my existing user that I have right here, my user that I had pre-created was assigned to this stack. Now, the user that we just created a second ago doesn't have any stacks assigned. So I'd have to come in here once I create the new stack from the new fleet that we're about to create from the image that we just created and say assign a stack. And then we're going to choose the new stack that we create in just a moment here. But for now, let's check out this invitation email. So we have a default username and password to log in with here and a link to the login page. So let's go ahead and set a custom password for this user. We'll say StratusGrid at proton.me and then paste in that default password. And then it's going to prompt us for a new password. I'll go ahead and specify a new password here. And as you can see, there are no applications assigned because this user has not been assigned to any AppStream stacks yet. So now we can go ahead and close that. And then what we're going to do is switch back over to the images here. And as you can see, this image is now available. All right. So one of the things I'm going to do here is, again, add a tag just so that my teammates know that this image was created and managed by me, even though it's obvious from the name. It's just a good practice to have tags in there. If I wanted to share this with any other AWS accounts, I could go to action and then share, or if I want to put it into different regions, I could do action copy and copy this image to other regions. So now what we need to do, now that this image has become available, is to build a fleet from this image. So I'm going to say fleets and then create fleet. And then you have a couple of options here. There's always on and then on demand. I'm just going to choose always on for simplicity here, and we can just scale it to a single instance for testing purposes here. And then I'm going to call this Trevor Rocky YouTube 2024-12-30. And for the instance type, I'll just choose 2 vCPUs with 4 gigs of memory. The maximum session duration, 960, that's, a number of hours. That's plenty fine. We can also specify an idle disconnect timeout if we'd like to here. So if the session's idle for 15 minutes, it'll just disconnect it. And so I might set that down to maybe 2 minutes, for example. So if it's idle for 2 minutes, then just kill it off. I'm going to set the maximum capacity to 1 because I don't want to ever scale this above there. And then you also have the ability to publish applications or the entire desktop. But in this case, we're just going to publish applications. So we're just going to be able to launch applications. We're not going to have full desktop access. And then down here for the tags, I'm going to say owner of this fleet is Trevor Sullivan. And then we'll go ahead and click on next here. Then we're going to choose the image. So this is the image that we just created a moment ago with the Firefox and Joplin applications published from it. Then we're going to specify our VPC. So again, I'm going to choose my VPC here with a couple of public subnets in different availability zones. And then we'll hit next and we'll say create fleet and say I acknowledge, understand the pricing. And if you want the pricing details for AppStream, you can just head over to Google and search for AppStream pricing and check out the AppStream marketing page. And this should explain to you kind of how the pricing structure works for AppStream. So you can always go over to the pricing details under the pricing section here. You could also use the pricing calculator. So if you go to, I think it's aws.calculator or calculator.aws actually, this allows you to add different services. So you could say create estimate, and then you could say specify a service like AppStream and then say configure. And maybe you want it to be an always on fleet. Maybe you're going to use the medium instance type. That's what we just used. Maybe we're going to use Rocky Linux here. Maybe we'll have 5 users per month. Let's say they're always active, so 24 hours a day. And so that'll allow you to kind of figure out what the utilization is. So you could say days in week, maybe 5 days a week, peak hours, 8 hours a day, off peak, maybe 0, and then average peak would be maybe 5 users. And so this will allow you to kind of figure out what the estimated cost for that service would be. You can add that service to your calculator. We'll just say 0 weekend, 0 hours for the weekend. And then you can get kind of a total estimate here. You can go to the summary and it'll show you all the line items that you've added. You can add other services as well, like VPC. If you want to add things like NAT gateways to your estimated cost, you could come into VPC. We don't need a VPN connection, so we could say, let's enable NAT gateway. There's also data transfer like egress and ingress. Ingress is free typically, but egress there is a cost for. So we could say, all right, we have one NAT gateway and it's going to process, let's say 50 gigs per month. We could save that and add it, go back to the summary. And so it kind of builds a running total for our estimate here. But anyways, let's go back to the fleet here. And so this is going to take a moment for it to actually launch the fleet. So if we drill into the details for that fleet, you can see it's currently in the starting state. You can see the capacity here. You can see the network details, the tags, and all that stuff. And so if we ever built a new image and installed additional applications, we could, again, just come into image details, say edit the image, and then specify a new image that we want to launch from. All right, so while that is building, the other thing that we need to do is to associate a stack to the fleet. So right here under the fleet, you can see it's not associated to any stacks. And so what we need to do is go to stacks, say create a stack, and we'll call this Trevor Rocky YouTube, and then today's date. And you can specify some options here. The only thing we really need to worry about is the fleet though. So the fleet is going to be the fleet that we just provisioned here that's still in the starting state. You can configure some options like VPC endpoints, but we're just going to use the internet streaming to stream directly across the internet, not through the VPC endpoint. You can also embed AppStream into websites. So if you want to embed this onto a custom website, you can add domains that you want to allow to embed from, but we're not going to worry about that kind of stuff for now. I'm just going to add my typical owner tag here that I do on all of my resources. And then if you are on a Windows Fleet, you can actually enable something called home folders for data persistence. I'm just going to go ahead and disable that because I don't believe that that's supported on Linux. You can also enable the clipboard options here. If you only want to allow pasting to the remote session, but not allow copying data from the remote session onto the local instance, then you can certainly do that for security reasons. You could also say, I'm only going to allow uploading data to the instance, and I'm not going to allow the user to download data from there. You can also disable printing to local devices for additional security and things like that. So we're going to go ahead and create this stack, and the fleet is finally now in the running state, so that's good. So we've got the fleet provisioned, we've got a stack created, we've got a user invited, and we've also set the user password. So now the only thing we need to do is to associate the stack that we created here, which has a fleet associated with it, to the user. So we're going to say assign the stack, and we want the one with YouTube in the name here, and we'll say assign stack, and it'll send the email notification to that user. So now this user that we just created is associated to this stack with this custom image created. So let's go back to our email here, and you can see we get this email saying that we have a new application. So go to the login page for AppStream here. And of course, we're already logged in our browser because we previously set our password and we're logged into the service. And so now we can choose one of these applications to access. One of the other things you can do, though, is to download the AppStream client. So I am on a Windows 11 system here at the moment. And so if I say AppStream download client, you can actually go to the AppStream website here and download either a Windows or Mac OS native client. And so I've already installed the Windows native client here, so I can actually run the AppStream client as a Windows application. And then I can paste in a URL to a remote instance. And so I think what I can do is just take this URL from the email and paste this in and then say connect, and it's going to prompt me to log in with my user credentials. So let's do StratusGrid at proton.me and then plug in my password here. And so now I actually have access to my applications through a Windows native application for AppStream instead of using the web browser. So that's another option that you have. So now I could choose, hey, I want to run Joplin here, and it's going to run Joplin right inside of the AppStream client on my Windows system. And then I have little controls up here if I want to enable microphone access, if I want to enable webcam access, things like that. I can do that from right up here. But this now allows me to actually just run Joplin on this remote application instance rather than running the application locally. And the benefit here is that because these AppStream instances are running in a cloud-based network VPC environment, there might be other business services that are running on that same VPC or another VPC that's peered or linked or VPN connected, somehow linked to that VPC where my AppStream instances are. And this AppStream instance will have access to those business services that are running on the cloud-based network, whereas my local computer does not have that same access directly to that network. So I'm able to stream these desktop applications that have access to those private business services running up in the cloud in AWS by using a graphical environment here instead. Now, the icon in the top left here allows me to switch between different applications that have been published. So if I want to launch another application in the same session here, I can just click on another application and it'll just open it up as another window right here inside of the same AppStream session. So I can run Firefox, I can run Joplin. If I had any other applications installed on that custom image builder that we just built, then I could launch those from here as well. So feel free to iterate on that. You can actually just launch another image builder using your existing custom image and then install another application on that image builder and then run the CLI command to publish it and then take a new image from that customized builder. So this is a really nice way to publish out access to business applications without having to necessarily, create laptops and ship out laptops to all of your contractors or external users. This just really gives you a straightforward way of creating a desktop environment for your users and publishing out just the applications that they specifically need access to. Now, keep in mind that we set up authentication using the built-in user pool inside of AppStream, but it does also support directory services integrations as well. So if you want to use a single sign-on mechanism and you have an existing directory service, then feel free to use that as well. But just for the sake of simplicity, we're just kind of demonstrating how to publish applications to specific email addresses by using the built-in AppStream user pool here. So there's a lot of functionality in here. Feel free to play around with it. It's pretty easy to get started with AppStream. Just go out to images, use one of the default publicly available images to launch a new image builder, customize that image builder just like we did earlier, and then build out your fleet after you take an image, and then create the stack, invite your users, and then assign those users to the stack that you created. And then those users should be able to log in to your cloud-based applications. In any case, I hope you learned something new from this video. Thanks so much for watching. Please like this video if you learned something new. Leave a comment down below and let us know what you thought of this video. And also subscribe to our channel and check out all of our historical videos that talk about various cloud and programming related topics. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next video. Take care.